I'm Madison Grant, 38. And last month at my brother's wedding, they seated me in the kitchen next to the ice machine after I'd signed a $35 million contract with the groom's new father-in-law. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fluke. It was a message clear, calculated, and cold as the metal chairs they thought I wouldn't dare complain about. Before I can continue my story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. I didn't always know what powerlessness felt like. Not in the textbook sense. I was the kid who fixed the VCR, the teenager who built a gaming server in our basement. People called me gifted, but my family never called me much of anything unless it was Carter's little sister or the quiet one. Growing up in Charleston meant living under a varnish of Southern politeness, a place where good girls smiled, fathers ran businesses, and sons inherited them. Our home was filled with monogrammed napkins and French blue wallpaper, but it also echoed with the sound of everyone praising Carter for simply existing. I used to believe I was just different, that maybe my time to shine would come later. But that belief calcified into something harder by the time I was 35, when I realized I had built EchoPoint Technologies from a laptop and a loan, and no one in my family had ever asked what it did. So when I found out Carter was marrying Charlotte Whitestone, daughter of George Whitestone, the same George who now ran a multi-billion-dollar commercial development firm, I felt that pull again. The childish hope that maybe they'd finally see me. The Twist Whitestone Properties had unknowingly reached out to my company months before the engagement was announced. Their COO, Olivia Hartman, had seen our software demo at a sustainability summit in D.C. She didn't know my last name. She didn't know Carter. She just saw value. 3 months of negotiations audits and whiteboard marathons later, we closed a $35 million contract that would change the scale of our company overnight. I was elated. Not just because of the money, but because I thought this was it. This would earn me my seat at the table. But that night at the wedding, I learned there's a difference between success and acceptance. That even the sharpest resume can't cut through a wall built by blood and bias. Jared, my partner, and I arrived dressed to the nines. He wore navy with black trim. I chose a deep sapphire sheath dress that matched the company's brand colors. I had even curled my hair, which I rarely do. I wanted to show up not just as the CEO of EchoPoint, but as the daughter of James and Vivian Grant. A sister, a human being, someone worthy of acknowledgement. When the wedding planner scanned her list and paused, her eyes flicked to mine with a tight smile. "You're at table O," she said, "just through here." We followed her past the glittering chandeliers and velvet drapes, past the ivy-covered trellis, and the ballroom full of laughter until we reached a side door. Behind it, the kitchen, the literal, bustling, dish-rattling kitchen. And in the farthest corner sat a folding table, dressed up with a starched white cloth and 2 lonely chairs. "I'm sorry, Ms. Grant," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. There were last-minute changes. No, there weren't. I stood there rooted to the tile floor, the scent of garlic and burnt butter filling my lungs. Through the swinging door, I could see my parents mingling at the head table, with Charlotte's family toasting crystal flutes of champagne. Laughing, comfortable, proud. My name was on the software contract that had just made that real estate empire even richer. And yet, here I was, exiled with the busboys and sous chefs, so they wouldn't have to explain my presence or my relevance. I didn't sit down. Not yet. I was still calculating what this meant and what I was about to do next. Charleston loves a good illusion. Cobblestone streets, wraparound porches, oysters on silver trays. Everything polished and curated, just like the Grant family holiday cards. Carter in the center, always with that practiced grin and a hint of a tan no matter the season. Me always slightly off-center, book in hand, my hair too frizzy, my dress a little too plain. No one ever said anything. They didn't have to. In our family, Carter was the natural successor. Handsome, affable, good with people. He played baseball in high school, wore Dad's old college ring by senior year. Even the guidance counselor called him a leader. When I got accepted to Stanford's computer science program with a full scholarship, Dad said, "That's nice, Maddie, but what will you do with it? Sit in a room coding all day. That room I sat in eventually became EchoPoint Technologies, but back then it was just the converted sunroom of my apartment, wedged between a folding desk and a leaky window. I worked through the hum of the neighbor's TV built and broke 1,000 prototypes and made friends with vending machine dinners. Meanwhile, Carter was given an office at Grant & Sons straight out of college, no application needed, no real performance reviewed. Dad called it legacy planning. When Mom told people what Carter did, she used words like executive visionary builder of tomorrow. When she described me, it was always our daughter Madison. She's out in California doing something with tech, if they remembered to mention me at all. And the thing is, I didn't mind, not at first. I convinced myself I didn't need their attention. I had purpose, passion, and a mind that sparked at the thought of solving logistical nightmares in seconds with code. I didn't need their praise. I didn't need their seat at the table. That's what I told myself anyway. But when Carter started dating Charlotte Whitestone, I felt something twist in my chest. Not jealousy, God, no. Charlotte was the kind of woman who monogrammed her gym towels. But her family, that was another matter. The Whitestones were Charleston royalty developers of half the city's skyline. When Carter brought her home that first Christmas, our parents lit up like she was the long-awaited crown jewel. "She's got connections," Dad whispered over eggnog. This could really elevate the family name. Elevate. As if Carter hadn't already been placed on a pedestal. As if I wasn't out there pitching to investors and managing a team of 30 with no safety net. Still, I showed up. I smiled through dinners. I bought gifts. I asked about the wedding plans. I even offered to help design a tech-driven RSVP platform as a gift. Charlotte said, "Oh, that's cute, but we're using the one our planner suggested." Carter just nodded. Not a word of thanks. Not even a glance of support. It was always like that. The time I presented at MIT's Women in Tech Forum, they sent a "so proud of you" text a day late. When Carter hosted a barbecue for his latest promotion, which by the way Dad manufactured, they sent engraved invites. I told Jared once over Thai takeout, I feel like a ghost in my own family. He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Ghosts don't write code that moves product through ports faster than DHL. They're just afraid of you, Mads. You don't fit in their story." Maybe he was right. But I wasn't ready to rewrite the story. Not yet. I still held out hope that one of them, any of them, might eventually see who I had become. That's why I didn't turn down the wedding invite. That's why I ordered the navy dress, booked a room at the Fairmont, and RSVP'd with optimism. I thought this time might be different. They called it a pipe dream. EchoPoint Technologies started as 2 spreadsheets and a pile of sticky notes built on the floor of my studio apartment, with my hair tied back in a scrunchie and a secondhand laptop balanced on my knees. It wasn't glamorous. My bed was a futon, my whiteboard was a window pane, and my food budget maxed out at boxed mac and cheese. But I had something most people in my position didn't, a clear problem to solve. Global logistics were broken. Companies hemorrhaged money on inefficiency, miscommunication, and bloated middle layers. And I had an idea software that could scan supply chain inputs in real-time, forecast weak points, and route alternatives before the delay ever happened. No AI buzzwords, just sharp logic, clean code, and relentless testing. I burned through my savings in 9 months, applied for 42 grants, landed one barely enough to upgrade my laptop and hire a part-time developer. Then came the nights I didn't sleep. Nights I questioned every line of code, every instinct. Nights I watched Carter on Instagram, cocktail in hand, grinning at golf outings and ribbon cuttings, while I watched water drip from a cracked ceiling tile onto my backpack. When I finally signed our first client, an East Coast apparel distributor, I cried alone at my desk, mouth pressed to my fist so the neighbors wouldn't hear. I was 34, hadn't had a vacation in 6 years, and still couldn't get my mother to ask what my company actually did. At family gatherings, they called me our independent one. The implication, unmarried, intense, inconvenient. Someone once asked Mom if I was seeing anyone, and she said, "Oh, I think she's married to that business of hers." Carter laughed so hard, he spilled red wine on the tablecloth. But I stayed the course. We launched a beta platform. It failed. We redesigned it. It failed again. We listened, iterated, tested with tiny companies that barely paid us anything but gave honest feedback. And then, on a random Thursday, one of those companies introduced me to a mid-size cosmetics brand that needed logistics help fast. That brand became our breakout client. Within 6 months, we had improved their order-to-shelf timeline by 18%. Word spread. Suddenly, emails arrived from operations managers I'd once cold-pitched and been ignored by. This time, they asked us for demos. EchoPoint grew. I hired staff, rented our first real office in a converted warehouse with bad insulation and amazing light. We got press, though, not the kind my parents read. But it didn't matter. We were building something that worked. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I met Jared at a tech sustainability panel. He approached me afterward with a quiet smile and asked a question no one else had ever led with. "What's your exit strategy?" I laughed. "World domination." "Yours." He said, "Getting women like you funded." I didn't fall fast, but when I did, it was solid. Jared never saw me as Carter's sister or James Grant's daughter. He saw what I'd built, and he stood beside it without feeling diminished, without having to own any part of it. When I told him we had a meeting scheduled with Whitestone Properties, he said this could change everything for EchoPoint. I nodded. Yeah. But maybe it changes things for me too. I said that out loud, because some foolish part of me still believed that maybe this would be the moment my family finally looked me in the eye and saw who I really was. It started with an email. The subject line was "Nothing Special Supply Chain Optimization Inquiry." But the sender, Olivia Hartman, was the Chief Operating Officer of Whitestone Properties. That email turned into a Zoom call. That call turned into 3. Then an NDA. Then access to their back-end data infrastructure. And finally, a 3-month evaluation that felt like walking a tightrope across a canyon full of lawyers. Olivia was sharp, curious, methodical. She didn't name drop. Didn't mention that her boss, George Whitestone, was one of the wealthiest men on the Eastern Seaboard. She evaluated us based on output, not pedigree. And when we nailed our third system demo, demonstrating how EchoPoint could cut a 6.8 miller bottleneck from their commercial build-outs, she smiled and said, "I'll be recommending immediate onboarding to the executive team." 3 weeks later, we signed a $35 million contract. I remember sitting in my office that night, the city lights smudged through the glass, Jared handing me a glass of champagne from the mini-fridge we rarely touched. I should have felt euphoric. I should have cried like I did the first time I signed a client. But instead, I felt cautious. Because I knew what was coming. Whitestone. That name had recently become personal. It took me a full 24 hours to mention it to my parents. "George Whitestone's company just signed on with EchoPoint," I said, on our weekly Sunday call. "It's the biggest contract we've landed." Silence. Then Mom said, "Oh, that's nice. Did you see the engagement photos Carter and Charlotte posted? They're just stunning. George has a private photographer, of course. Very tasteful." And just like that, the door closed again. I didn't push it. I never told Carter either. Not directly. And neither, apparently, did George. It wasn't until the engagement party hosted at the Whitestone family's golf estate that the puzzle pieces started to move. George approached me as I sipped sparkling water under a pergola dripping with fairy lights. He was taller than I expected, with weathered hands, and a gaze that said he'd negotiated circles around empires. "You're Madison Grant," he asked, offering his hand. "EchoPoint's founder." I nodded. "That's right." He smiled. "Your platform is going to change the way we build. Olivia's been raving about it nonstop. You've got a hell of a team." "Thank you. We're excited about the partnership." That's when my mother appeared, trailing her familiar cloud of designer floral perfume, and practiced social surprise. "Oh, Mr. Whitestone, you've met our Madison?" George raised an eyebrow. "Your daughter runs EchoPoint." Mom laughed high and sharp. "She's always been our little tech genius. Never could get her interested in the family business, but she's off doing her thing." George glanced between us, clearly recalculating something. "Interesting. Carter never mentioned his sister was involved in this deal." That word "involved" it burned. Before I could reply, Mom changed the subject, linking her arm through mine and guiding me toward the dessert bar like nothing had happened. Like George's confusion and my professional identity were just momentary static on the otherwise perfect evening broadcast. Later, Jared found me outside by the koi pond. "You okay?" he asked, handing me a fresh drink. "They had no idea who I was," I said flatly. "Not even George." Does that matter? I took a sip. It wouldn't if it didn't feel so intentional. Jared touched my shoulder. They can't ignore you forever. Maybe I said, but they're sure as hell trying. That night, as we drove home from the party, I kept turning one thing over in my mind. The deal I thought would finally earn their respect had passed them by like a whisper in a crowded room. And it wasn't just indifference, it was erasure. Strategic. Quiet. Complete. But the wedding was coming. The grand merger of the Grants and the Whitestones. And I still believed somewhere in the most naive part of myself that the ceremony might bring a different ending. Looking back, the engagement party was the dress rehearsal for the betrayal. A glittering event sprawled across Whitestone's private estate. Think marble fountains, custom cocktails with gold leaf rims, live jazz under hanging orchids. A Charleston fairy tale if your last name meant something in the business registry. Jared and I arrived 15 minutes early. He wore a slate gray jacket that caught the early evening light. I wore the same navy dress I'd later be humiliated in. Back then, I still believed it might mark a turning point. Still believed that showing up as myself fully professionally, personally, might finally earn me not just a place, but a voice. Charlotte met us near the bar. "Madison," she said, her smile thin and already disinterested. "You look so efficient." "Thank you," I replied, resisting the bait. "This is Jared Lynn." She gave him a quick up and down glance that warmed by about 5 degrees when she realized who he was. Jared's name carried weight in tech investment circles. Charlotte's tone turned sweet, and within a minute, she was gushing about the lighting budget for the wedding reception like we were co-planning it together. Then George Whitestone approached. "Jared," he said with a hearty handshake, "heard great things. And Madison EchoPoint is already getting nods from our West Coast division. You weren't overselling it." That's when it happened. Charlotte's head tilted. EchoPoint. George smiled. "Your fiancé's future sister-in-law built the tech platform that's powering our supply chain transformation. We signed with her firm 3 months ago." Charlotte blinked. Slowly. "Oh," she said with a tight smile. "I didn't realize you were still doing that." I kept my own smile steady. Still and thriving. George chuckled. "I'd say more than thriving. Madison, we need to schedule a follow-up soon. I want to discuss phase 2 personally." I nodded, keeping my voice cool. "Happy to." What came next felt like the sound of a balloon quietly deflating. A little pop inside Charlotte's brain. The math didn't sit right. Because if I was the one George was praising, then where did that leave Carter? I could almost see the thoughts forming behind her eyes. The story they'd all told, the narrative of Carter being the upwardly mobile heir, the smart marital bet the partner to be proud of it no longer held. So she did what people like Charlotte always do. She filed the new data away as an inconvenience and reshaped the event to re-establish the hierarchy. Her hierarchy. The very next day, I sent an RSVP update to the planner to confirm Jared's attendance. I offered to assist with any last-minute tech issues. No response. Instead, 3 days later, I received a formal envelope with a printed seating card, Ms. Madison Grant, Table O. I stared at it for a long time. O, not A, B, or even H, O. I showed Jared. He shrugged. Could be random, but I knew better. I had seen Charlotte's face when George praised me. I'd watched Carter shift uncomfortably, his hand tightening on his whiskey glass. There's a kind of silence that follows a truth someone wishes hadn't been spoken. At that moment, I should have stepped back. I should have canceled, preserved my dignity, protected myself from what I knew was coming. But I didn't, because deep down, I still thought that showing up with grace might rewrite the ending. I didn't yet understand some stories aren't meant to be rewritten. They're meant to be left behind. It's strange how memory works. I remember the sound the wedding planner's shoes made on the marble, sharp, nervous little taps. I remember the feel of Jared's hand on my lower back, steady but tightening. I remember the smell vanilla orchid sea air and the faint chemical bite of whatever cleaner they'd used on the floors. But what I remember most is the moment the planner scrolled through her tablet, her mouth pressed into a line, and said, "You're at Table O." Then she paused. Like she knew. Like maybe she didn't agree, but she'd agreed to enforce it. Through that side door just past the kitchen entrance, she added quickly, "Someone will meet you there." "Wait," I said, "past the kitchen." Jared turned toward her. "Is there a mistake? She's the groom's sister." She swallowed hard. There were adjustments. There always are when powerful people need to make someone disappear politely. We followed her directions. Through the far hall, past the staff corridor. The sounds of laughter and clinking glass faded behind us until all I could hear was the hum of refrigeration and the metallic clatter of pans. And there it was, a folding table in the corner of the kitchen, dressed in a white cloth, sure, but still unmistakably out of place. A sad little bouquet of baby's breath sat in a glass jar between two tea-light candles. Someone had tried to make it look intentional. I stood frozen. I RSVP'd months ago, I said to the catering manager, who greeted us with apology in her eyes. And I'm not just the groom's sister. My company is currently under contract with Whitestone Properties. I wasn't informed of that, she said, clearly flustered. We were told to accommodate overflow for VIPs. Overflow, I was overflow. And then, right on cue, Charlotte appeared. Oh dear, she said with the faux innocence only someone like her could pull off. Is there a problem? Yes, I said, controlling my voice like I was back in a boardroom. You've placed me and my guest in the kitchen. She took a slow sip of champagne. We had to prioritize. Daddy's investors, some people from Atlanta, the mayor's deputy chief of staff. You understand, right? No, I didn't, not anymore. Scott signed off on the seating chart this morning, she added. He knows where everyone is. That one landed. Jared tensed beside me but didn't speak. Scott knew. My brother, the one I'd cheered for at every game, the one whose scraped knees I cleaned, the one whose business I never undermined, even when I knew exactly how much of his success had been handed to him, had agreed to this. The betrayal was surgical, so precise it didn't even leave blood. I didn't yell, I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I said, Jared, I need a moment alone. Would you mind waiting outside? He looked at me for a beat, eyes steady, then nodded. Take your time, I'll be by the car. After he left, I stood still in the kitchen, surrounded by heat lamps, busy servers, and the low thrum of the espresso machine. Invisible to my family, but fully visible to the staff, who were too professional to stare, but stared anyway. It wasn't just about a table. It was about a message. This is where you belong. This is the space we've assigned to you, not at the head table, not with the future, not in the story we tell about ourselves. You're efficient, you're useful, but you are not one of us. They had built an empire of comfort around Carter, and I was a variable they never wanted to solve for. I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling, but not from weakness, from clarity. And with one breath, I whispered, enough. There are few things more humiliating than crying in a public restroom. You try to keep the sobs silent. Hold your breath between gasps, pray no one walks in. That's where I ended up alone, in a marble stall forehead, pressed against the cool metal tears, streaking the concealer I'd carefully applied that morning to look polished but approachable. I didn't cry because of the table. I cried because I had spent a lifetime swallowing slights so small they were easy to ignore, but sharp enough to scar. Because I had spent weeks choosing the right dress, the right words, the right partner to bring. Because I had dared to believe that this time showing up would matter. It hadn't. My sobs came in waves, muffled by the sleeve of my dress. Outside the stall, the faint sound of someone entering made me hold my breath. Heels clicked on tile, then paused. The person left. No one wanted to witness what was happening behind that door. Eventually, I stood up. I cleaned my face with tissues that scratched, reapplied lipstick with shaking fingers, stared at my reflection and asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" That's when I realized I hadn't come for Carter. Not really. I hadn't even come for my parents. I'd come for the ghost of something I thought still might be resurrected recognition, belonging, not as a guest in their narrative, but as a central character in my own. My phone buzzed again. A text from Jared, I'm waiting out front. Whatever you need, I'm with you. Another message sat above it, this one from an unknown number. I tapped it. It was Eleanor Hartman. Just confirming our implementation meeting for Monday. Also, first payment has been processed. $35 is scheduled. In the middle of my grief spiral, that number stared back at me like a mirror. $35 million. The amount of money my company had just earned from the family of the woman who'd relegated me to the kitchen. My company, my signature, my intellectual property. That wasn't just leverage. That was proof. Proof that I wasn't just doing something with tech. I wasn't a placeholder. I wasn't a garnish on Carter's plate of legacy. I was the damn main course. I stood taller, straightened my dress, re-centered my thoughts. There was a fine line between revenge and resolution, and I wasn't about to cross it carelessly. But I did know this. I was done letting these people dictate my worth through table assignments and veiled indifference. I walked out of the bathroom with a steady breath and a calm I hadn't felt in years. Jared stood by the valet station, arms crossed loosely, his presence a balm I didn't know I needed until I saw him. He handed me a flute of champagne. Figured you might want this more than I did. Thanks, I said, taking a slow sip. I'm sorry you had to see all that. Don't be, he said. If anything, it confirms everything I've ever admired about you. I looked at him. Like what? Your ability to walk through fire and still negotiate the terms of your exit. That made me laugh. Not a forced performative laugh, but a real one. The kind that tightens your chest because it carries something you haven't felt in a while relief. What do you want to do? He asked gently. I need to make a phone call, I said, sliding my phone from my clutch. He raised an eyebrow. To who? To the only people in this whole place who actually know what I built, I replied, and who will feel it when I walk away. And then with my fingers steady and my voice composed, I made the call that would fracture everything they'd planned and finally center me in my own damn story. I stepped away from the valet circle into a quieter corridor behind the main tent. The reception was in full swing, jazz band playing champagne, bubbling voices, rising in easy, oblivious laughter. But all I could hear was the soft ringing in my ear as the phone connected. Gregory, I said, keeping my tone measured. It's Madison. Our chief operating officer picked up instantly. Everything okay? No, I said. But it will be. I need you to begin the termination process on the Whitestone contract. Effective immediately. A pause. The full contract. Yes. Draft the notice, prep legal, notify the transition team. He exhaled slowly. Understood. But may I ask what happened? I'll explain everything Monday, I said. For now, just trust me. Always, he replied. And that was it. No resistance, no second guessing. I hung up and slid the phone back into my clutch, just as we reached the tent again. I could already feel the emotional dissonance of the moment, me, calm as a glacier, moving toward the inferno of the head table, where they were still toasting my brother like a war hero. Jared gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. You sure about this? Never been surer. I walked across the polished floor and measured steps. No drama, no storm. Just quiet purpose. Richard Whitestone noticed me first. His face shifted an odd blend of professional respect and personal discomfort. Madison, he said, straightening. We were just discussing EchoPoint. Impressive system. Already seeing gains. I'm glad to hear that, I replied evenly. Because this will be the last week you'll have access to it. The table went silent. Forks hovered midair. Carter blinked at me like he wasn't sure if I was joking or about to hand him a check. I've just instructed my COO to terminate our contract. I continued, citing irreconcilable issues with the professional values demonstrated by your executive stakeholders, namely your family. Excuse me, Richard asked, his voice low and sharp. I wasn't invited to speak tonight, I said, but you'll hear me anyway. Because that $35 million, that was my value on paper. But apparently, in this family, I'm still worth less than a table near the bar. Carter stood abruptly. You're overreacting, Mads. No, I said. You underreacted. You watched it happen. You let them seat me in the kitchen. You signed off on the chart. I didn't think it mattered. That's always been the problem. You never think it matters until I make sure that it does. Richard cleared his throat. This feels like a personal grievance, not a business one. Then you've misunderstood how good business works, I said. It's built on respect, trust, equity, none of which was present when your daughter and your future son-in-law chose to diminish my presence at a table I earned. Not through blood, through work. Tiffany, silent until now, hissed through clenched teeth. This is my wedding, Madison. My wedding. And I sincerely hope you remember it forever, I said. Because I know I will. The silence that followed was thick enough to slice through. Jared gently guided me back toward the exit. But as we walked away, something remarkable happened. One by one, two of Richard's investors' men I'd seen at networking events, but never spoken to, stood from the table and followed us out. The first introduced himself as Kenneth Walsh, managing partner at Clarion Development. Miss Grant, he said, offering a card. If EchoPoint's available, we'd love a conversation. We respect your clarity. The second, a woman named Lorraine Fraser from Shoreline Holdings, simply said, "Sometimes walking away makes you louder." That was thunder. I accepted their cards without pride or smugness, just a steady gratitude that someone had heard me, that my walkout didn't end in a void. And for the first time in my entire professional life, I didn't feel small. I felt exact. By Monday morning, my inbox was a battlefield. Eleanor Hartman had sent 4 emails between 6:30 and 8 a.m., each more urgent than the last. The subject lines escalated from "checking in" to "please call ASAP" to "Richard would like to schedule a conversation." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked into EchoPoint's downtown office high ceilings, exposed brick, the smell of strong coffee in the air, and gathered my leadership team. "This isn't a crisis," I told them. "It's a redirection. We'll be fine." And we were. By Wednesday, Gregory had confirmed that Coastal Builders, the very firm that had witnessed my stand at the wedding, wanted a full platform demo. By Friday, they'd offered a 2-year contract worth $20 million with expansion incentives. We didn't just recover, we pivoted exactly as a resilient company should. Internally, morale was high. No one needed to hear every sordid detail. They just knew the CEO had chosen principle over prestige. And that choice surprisingly energized the team. But the most unexpected thing that happened that week didn't come from a client or an investor. It came from a phone call from a number I hadn't seen in over 20 years. "Madison," the voice said, warm and oddly familiar. "This is Denise, your aunt, your father's sister." I stood still in my office, my coffee halfway to my lips. "Aunt Denise," I repeated, stunned. "I thought you lived in Arizona." "I do," she said. "But I've kept tabs on you." I sat down speechless. "I heard what happened at the wedding," she continued. "And I wanted to say good for you. I left Charleston for the same reasons. Built my own firm. Your grandfather left everything to your dad. Said I lacked the temperament for legacy." Sound familiar? It did. We spoke for almost an hour. She told me about the design firm she built from the ground up, how she never looked back after walking away from the Grant name, how she watched me rise from a distance, proud but unwilling to disrupt the family story. But now she said maybe the story's finally changing. That night, I thought a lot about the invisible network of women like us, cut from succession, denied recognition, surviving in exile, but quietly building empires of our own. So I did something impulsive but necessary. I launched a program I'd been thinking about for years, a mentorship collective for women navigating business in the shadow of male legacy. I called it Illuminate. 20 women signed up within the first week. One of them wrote, "I've been working in my father's shadow for a decade. I didn't know there were others like me." Another wrote, "They told me my place was in reception. I'm the CTO now, but I still feel like I snuck in." Each story cracked something open in me. The pain was familiar. So was the strength. And suddenly, all of it, every slight, every exclusion, every lonely celebration, began to feel like kindling for something bigger. At home, Jared was my quiet constant. He cooked when I worked late, held me when I replayed conversations I hadn't realized still lived rent-free in my head. Never once did he ask, was it worth it, because he knew the answer better than I did. "This isn't a revenge story," I told him once, sitting with my feet on his lap, wineglass in hand. "It's a release." And it was. A release from trying to fit into rooms that were never built for me, from editing myself to sound more palatable, from carrying a family name that had always treated me like a footnote. What I was building now wasn't just a company. It was a legacy of my own. The text came on a quiet Thursday evening, just as Jared and I were debating takeout or cooking. "Carter Dad wants to have dinner next week. Just the family? Says he has something important to discuss. Will you come?" I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to answer, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking, what do they want from me? I was asking, what do I want from them? Jared leaned over, reading the screen. "Well, I'll go," I said finally. "But I'm bringing you." Obviously, he smiled. No more solo battles. Luciano's was the restaurant. Upscale Italian dim lighting, white tablecloths so crisp they looked ironed by lasers. I arrived in a tailored suit, not a dress, not for them, and Jared's presence was both grounding and declarative. I don't hide anymore. They were already seated when we arrived. My father stood face unreadable and pulled out my chair like we hadn't just burned $35 million between us. Vivian offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look well, Madison." "Thank you," I said. "So do you." No one mentioned the wedding, not directly. No one said the word kitchen. But it hung in the air, a ghost sitting in the empty chair between me and Carter. James cleared his throat. "I asked for this dinner because I think some things were mishandled." A half apology. I didn't rescue him with a nod. "And I wanted you to know," he continued, "that your work has brought a lot of attention to the family. Positive attention. We're proud of you." "Are you proud of the decision I made?" I asked calmly. He paused. "That's complicated." "No, it's not," I said. "You're either proud of who I am and how I lead, or you're proud only when I stay quiet." Vivian jumped in. "Madison, can't we just move forward? It's been an emotional few weeks." "Yes," I said. "Let's move forward. But not by pretending nothing happened. That won't work anymore." Carter finally spoke, his voice lower than usual. "You embarrassed us, but you weren't wrong." I blinked, stunned. Tiffany changed the seating, he said, eyes fixed on his untouched wine. I knew. I let her. "I was tired of feeling like I was second place in every room you walked into." "You never were," I said. "You just never had to earn the rooms." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." That was all I needed from him. Not reconciliation, not warmth, just truth. After dinner, Jared and I walked through the cobbled streets, outside the Charleston air, cool and damp with memory. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm clear," I said. They hadn't changed. Not really. But I had. I didn't need their permission. I had built my own terms. That night, I lay in bed and reread one of the messages from a woman in my Illuminate group. "You taught me that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors we lock from the inside when someone refuses to respect the threshold." I locked that door the night of the wedding. And every day since I've been designing the life that exists on the other side of it. There's a moment in every life when you realize the seat you've been fighting for isn't worth it, not because you're not worthy, but because the table was never built with you in mind. Have you ever had to walk away from a place where you weren't valued? From family work or tradition? How did it feel to choose yourself instead? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. If this journey resonated with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who's struggling to take up space they've already earned. You are not too much. You are not misplaced. You are simply waiting to stand in the center of your own design. Let that be the story you tell next.